lonely rancher, ordered a virgin bride, but found a widow with tears. A voice that broke his silence. The sun had just dipped behind the white steeple of Hillford Church when the wagon rolled in, wheels groaning against gravel like an old man's knees. A small crowd had already gathered by the wooden steps, most of them with folded arms, curious eyes, and sharp tongues. The rancher stood apart from them, tall and silent, hat low, leaning against his cane like it had roots in the earth. They had come to see the bride. He had written for one, a pure, untouched woman of good moral standing, as the agency promised. Virgin, no prior bonds, able to work with livestock, the letter had said. The townsfolk couldn't help but gossip. A rancher that silent, that withdrawn, ordering a bride like a man orders seed or rope. It stirred every small mind within 10 miles. When the wagon door opened, a hush fell. A woman stepped out. No blush on her cheek, no ribbon in her hair, just a deep brown dress, slightly dusty, and a pair of cracked boots that had known too many roads. She was not young, but not yet old. Her hands trembled as she clutched a cloth bundle to her chest, and behind her eyes sat something raw, not shame, not pride, but something too broken to name. A child pointed. "Mama, is that her? She's all alone." A whisper ran through the crowd. "She's no virgin. She's older than he asked for. Looks like she's been through something. Maybe she's a widow." The woman didn't speak. She just stood there, the wind catching the hem of her dress. Her eyes scanned the faces not with defiance, but with the hollow gaze of someone who had survived too much to flinch. The rancher said nothing, but his eyes lifted slowly to meet hers. And then, through the quiet, her voice, low, gentle, trembling, rose like a leaf skimming water. "I know I'm not what you asked for," she said. The crowd shifted, murmurs stirred. Someone laughed under their breath. But the rancher didn't move. His silence wasn't cold. It wasn't pity. It was the kind that listens. Her name was Eleanor. Most people didn't bother to ask. She had come from a town where her face was known for all the wrong reasons. There, they whispered behind her back and crossed streets in front of her. Not long ago, she had been a wife, wrapped in the quiet rhythms of a shared life. Chopping wood beside him, mending his sleeves, sharing bread in silence. But that life had ended one cold morning when his heart gave out before the sun came up. Just like that, she was a widow. And with his death came the unspooling of everything. There were no children. Not because they didn't try, but because the doctor had said something about her body being unwilling. That word stuck to her like damp cloth. Unwilling. As if her womb had made a choice to remain empty. Her in-laws didn't say it aloud, but their eyes did. First, they buried her husband. Then, without much fuss, they buried their kindness toward her. Soon after, the landlord came knocking. There was no savings, no hands to help. She packed what little she had, sold the wedding ring for a seat on a westbound wagon, and left behind the house with its echoing walls. When the mail-order bride agency replied, she didn't lie. She told them she was barren. She told them she was a widow. But perhaps, in their hunger to make a match, they had overlooked the fine print of her truth. Now she stood in this unfamiliar town, with all eyes on her, a woman who had already failed at wifehood once. Her hands were calloused, her cheeks lined from worry, but her back remained straight, even under the weight of judgment. She did not cry, not even when the first woman in the crowd muttered, "He could have done better." She simply looked ahead, her chin trembling but raised. Eleanor had known love once, real, quiet love, the kind you tend like a fire through hard winters. But now she wasn't looking for warmth. She was just looking for a place where no one needed her to explain why she wasn't enough. The rancher's eyes had not moved from hers. In them, she saw something strange, not recognition, not surprise, but stillness. And for the first time in many miles, she didn't feel like a ghost passing through. She felt seen. That was more dangerous than any insult, because it meant she could still hope. And hope, she had learned, could break you in ways grief never could. He was called Samuel Hart, a man shaped by the land itself, broad-shouldered, thick-palmed and weathered like the fence post that lined his ranch. He did not speak unless there was something worth saying. Most folks in Hilford mistook that for pride. The truth was simpler. After his wife passed, the sound of his own voice had begun to feel like an echo in an empty barn, loud, pointless, and full of absence. Samuel had not meant to send for a bride. It was his sister Ruth who had filled out the form and mailed it without telling him. She said silence was eating him alive, that a man wasn't meant to talk to cattle more than people. When the letter came back with a name and a promise, Samuel didn't argue. He simply built a room at the end of the hallway and cleared a space in his days. He expected someone young, soft-spoken, unmarked by life. But when the woman stepped off the wagon, something in him stilled. She didn't flinch under the weight of stares. She didn't shrink when the murmurs started. Her voice, soft and cracked, rose in the middle of judgment like a prayer. "I know I'm not what you asked for." Samuel heard every word, but more than that, he heard the spaces between them, the kind only a man who has lived through deep loss can recognize. There was something in her posture that refused to beg, something in her eyes that dared the world to look away first. A nearby boy laughed. Someone whispered, "Poor man doesn't know what he's getting." Samuel turned his head slowly toward them. He said nothing, but the look he gave could have frozen fire. Then he took one step forward. Just one. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the cloth bundle in her arms. She didn't lower her eyes. Samuel lifted his hand, not in greeting, not in command, but like he might reach for a lantern in the dark. And then he nodded once. It was enough. The crowd, sensing no more theater, began to scatter. Boots shuffled, doors opened. Curiosity turned to boredom, but Samuel stood his ground, watching the woman who was not what he ordered. He didn't see her scars. He saw her standing. He didn't see her shame. He saw her spine. And in that still moment, he didn't feel pity. He felt something else. A presence. Something rare. Something that asked for nothing, but might, one day, give everything. The ride to the ranch was quiet. Samuel drove the wagon with steady hands, the reins loose, the horses knowing their path better than he did. Eleanor sat beside him, eyes fixed ahead, lips pressed tight, her bundle resting in her lap like it held the last threads of her name. The wind teased loose strands of her hair, but she made no move to tuck them back. Halfway down the trail, he reached into his coat and handed her a handkerchief. It was worn, edges soft from years of folding, but clean. She blinked at it, hesitating. "For the dust," he said, voice low, even. She took it slowly, like it might vanish if she moved too quick. "Thank you." Silence returned, but it felt different. Not cold, just careful. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had painted the sky in bruised oranges and deepening blues. The house stood like a sentinel against the hills, not grand, but honest. A porch swing creaked softly in the breeze, a lamp flickered behind one window. Inside, Samuel guided her to a room at the end of the hallway. It had a narrow bed, a small desk, a chair, and a quilt folded at the foot, hand-stitched, faded at the edges. "I built this room last month," he said. "Didn't know what you'd like, but it's yours." Eleanor placed her bundle on the bed without unwrapping it. Her fingers hovered above the quilt, brushing its surface like it might whisper something to her. "I appreciate it," she said softly. He turned to go, but paused at the doorway. "You don't owe me anything." She looked up, startled. "This place—" "It's not a bargain," he said, voice roughened by disuse. "You're not here to pay back a room." Eleanor's throat tightened. For so long, every place she entered came with a price, a favor, a compromise. He broke the silence again. "If you want to help, you can. If not, that's fine too." Her hands folded the handkerchief slowly, placing it on the nightstand. "I'll do what I can." He gave a small nod, then stepped back into the hallway, leaving the door open behind him. Later that evening, as she watched the sun melt behind the hills through the tiny window, she touched the quilt again. Not because it was warm, but because someone had made it for someone else, with time, care, and quiet hope stitched into every square. That night, she slept without shoes on for the first time in weeks. And in the hallway, Samuel sat in his old armchair, listening to the silence of the house. For the first time in years, it did not feel empty. Eleanor woke before dawn the next morning. Light had not yet touched the hills, but the sound of boots on the porch told her Samuel had already begun his day. She washed her face in the basin, folded the quilt neatly, and stepped into the kitchen with quiet determination. The coffee pot confused her. It sat atop the stove like a relic, its handle hot, its lid stubborn. She managed to burn her thumb before figuring out how it worked. The eggs she tried to fry stuck to the pan, the butter turned too quick, and the bread she sliced looked like it had been chewed on one side. Still, she placed everything on the table before he returned. When he did, he looked at the plate, then at her. He braced herself for the worst, a flinch, a sigh, a thankless bite. Instead, he pulled out his chair, nodded once and said, "Smells better than it looks." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't mockery either. They ate in near silence, the kind filled with small glances and the scraping of forks. Afterward, Eleanor insisted on washing the dishes. She dropped one, a ceramic plate that shattered like it had waited years to fall apart. She stood frozen, knuckles white, waiting for something sharp to be said. Samuel looked over from the window. "That one had a crack anyway," he murmured. "Been meaning to let it go." The words sank deeper than she expected, like maybe she wasn't the only broken thing still being kept around. In the days that followed, she tried her hand at barn work. The goats didn't like her. The chickens scattered when she came near. She nearly tripped over a loose plank by the stable and bruised her shin trying to chase a runaway bucket. Each night, she folded back into herself, quiet, shoulders tight, lips bitten from trying too hard. Then one evening, she found a comb resting on her nightstand, wooden, smooth, carved along the edge with a vine pattern. No note, just the object, placed carefully beside the lamp. The next day, when she came in from feeding the chickens, she found a small drawing on the kitchen table, a pencil sketch of the porch, the swing slightly tilted, the door cracked open. It was simple, but careful. Someone had watched closely to make it. Underneath it, in faint pencil, the words, "Home looks better with you in it." She pressed her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes. He never said anything about the gifts. He just kept going, mending fence posts, brushing the horses, hauling hay. But every evening she'd find another small thing, a blanket stitched with her initials, a worn book about herbs, a pencil sharper than the ones in the drawer. She still burned the bread. She still dropped the pail once a week. But her hands shook less. And one evening, while Samuel sat outside carving a handle for a shovel, she brought him a cup of tea. She didn't speak. She just placed it beside him and sat down on the top step of the porch. They didn't look at each other, but the silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt shared, like they were learning to speak without words. The child came on a Thursday, brought in a stranger's wagon with nothing but a faded satchel and wide, curious eyes. Her name was Lily. She had belonged to Samuel's cousin, a drifting man who drank too much and worked too little. When his wife passed, the girl had been passed around like a borrowed thing. Samuel was her last blood tie, and now she had arrived, 7 years old, and blinking into the light like she hadn't seen kindness in some time. Eleanor had been sweeping the porch when the wagon stopped. She watched as Samuel walked to the girl, knelt down slowly, and took her satchel. He didn't say much, just rested a hand on her back and led her up the steps. "This is Eleanor," he told the child. "She helps keep the house." Eleanor knelt too, unsure how close to get. The girl was all bones and hair, a single braid draped across her shoulder. They looked at each other for a moment. "Do you like tea?" Eleanor asked gently. Lily nodded once. That afternoon, they sat together in the kitchen. Eleanor poured milk into the girl's cup and placed 2 sugar cubes on the side. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she stirred. When she spilled a little, Eleanor simply wiped it with her sleeve. "No harm done," she said with a soft smile. The girl studied her, like a puzzle she hadn't seen before. Then she said, "You smell like flowers." Eleanor blinked. "Do I?" Lily nodded again. "And your voice is soft, like bedtime stories." It was such a small thing, so innocent. But it landed deep. No one had said she smelled sweet in years. No one had compared her voice to anything but silence. Later that night, after Lily's bath and supper, Eleanor tucked her into the small cot by the window. The wind outside rattled the panes, and the girl gripped the blanket tightly. "Do you want me to stay a while?" Eleanor asked. The girl didn't answer with words. She simply lifted her arms and whispered, "Mama." Eleanor froze. The word hung in the air like a candle's final flicker. She didn't correct her, didn't say it was too soon, didn't remind her of bloodlines or proper names. She climbed into the bed, held the girl close, and let the silence wrap around them like wool. Outside, Samuel stood on the porch, listening to the wind, and the sound of 2 hearts breathing in rhythm for the first time. It happened one morning, just as the frost had begun to lift from the fields and the first golden breath of spring reached the valley. Eleanor had gone to town with Lily to trade eggs and flour. They walked together down the narrow dirt street, passing the blacksmiths, the mill, and the post house. Some heads turned. Most folks had grown used to her presence, and though a few still whispered, they did so with less venom now, until a voice broke through the air like a whip. "Well, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to see you wearing respect like a borrowed dress." Eleanor froze. Lily's hand slipped into hers. The man who stood across from them had a crooked smile and boots too fine for honest work. His name was Walter Hale, her late husband's cousin, a man who had once come around offering help after the funeral and had stayed too long, asked too many questions, and touched her elbow just a little too firmly. When she rejected his quiet suggestions to start over with him, he had made sure the town saw her differently. "I heard you took a wagon west," he said, stepping closer. "Didn't think it'd be this far. Still got that sharp tongue under all that modesty?" Eleanor kept her voice even. "Go home, Walter." Walter looked down at Lily, and then back at her. "A child too? My, you move fast for a widow." Eleanor stiffened but didn't answer. "I could say a few words to your new man," Walter went on. "Tell him what kind of woman he's harboring. What kind of past you carry around like perfume. That child is not mine by blood," she said quietly, "and I owe no part of myself to you." He leaned in close, his breath sour. "You forget, Ellie. I remember the nights you cried in the kitchen, how fast your husband died, how empty your bed stayed. You can put on a new dress, but you can't outrun what's underneath it." Eleanor's hands trembled. Lily squeezed her fingers, unsure, afraid. But before she could speak, a shadow moved across the street. Samuel. He hadn't come to town with them. But there he stood now, still as a tree, eyes locked on Walter. His hands were calm at his sides, but his presence filled the space like thunder before a storm. Walter turned, startled. "This your rancher, then? Does he know who she really is?" Samuel didn't blink. "I know more than you ever will." Walter laughed, but uneasily now. "You planning to fight me, old man?" Samuel stepped forward. "You're not worth a fight. But you'll leave town. Today. And you won't speak her name again." "Or what?" Samuel's voice lowered, thick with warning. "Or you'll learn what silence can do when it breaks." The crowd that had begun to gather backed away slightly. Something about Samuel's stillness felt more dangerous than any threat. Walter scoffed. "She's not worth the trouble." But his boots turned, and he walked away. Eleanor didn't breathe until he was gone. Samuel looked at her, not with pity, but with steadiness. "I heard what he said," he murmured. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to be. I have a past." "So do I." She looked away, ashamed. He stepped closer. "Don't hide from me, Eleanor. I've built this house with broken wood and mended things. I can tell what's worth keeping." For the first time, she didn't feel the need to explain herself. And for the first time, her past stopped feeling like a shadow. The wind had picked up that day, wild and sharp across the open field. Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line while Lily chased a red ribbon through the tall grass. The ribbon had been tied in her hair that morning, a gift from Eleanor. Simple, satin, and bright against the child's sun-browned skin. "Don't go too far," Eleanor called. "I won't," Lily sang back, laughing. Just beyond the rise, a horse neighed, high, panicked. A moment later, a chestnut mare broke through the fence, reins trailing, eyes wide with terror. One of the ranch hands must have left the gate unlatched. The horse tore down the field, hooves slicing the earth, dust rising like smoke behind her. And Lily stood directly in its path. Eleanor didn't think. She dropped the clothespin basket, tore across the yard, skirt flaring, breath burning in her lungs. The child had frozen, eyes locked on the oncoming beast. "Lily!" Eleanor shouted. "Get down!" But the girl couldn't move. In one motion, Eleanor flung herself forward, wrapped her arms around Lily, and twisted them both to the ground just as the mare thundered past. Dirt exploded around them. A hoof missed Eleanor's shoulder by inches. When the dust cleared, Eleanor was lying over the child, shaking. Lily sobbed into her chest. Samuel arrived seconds later, rifle slung but untouched, heart in his throat. He leapt from the porch and ran, faster than a man of his age and limp had moved in years. He dropped beside them, voice hoarse. "Is she hurt?" Eleanor shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "She's scared, that's all." He pulled them both into his arms, not gently but firmly, like anchoring something before the wind could steal it away. The ranch hands caught the horse down by the creek, but it took an hour before Lily stopped trembling. Later, at sunset, Samuel built a fire in the yard. Eleanor sat beside it with Lily wrapped in a quilt on her lap. Two womenfolk who had seen the commotion came up the road, curious at first, but quiet when they saw them together. One of the women, a schoolteacher named Clara, knelt beside Eleanor. "That was brave," she said. "What you did for that girl." Eleanor didn't answer. Samuel did. "She belongs here. Don't let anyone say different." It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration. And the way he looked at her, steady, sure, without fear, made the whole town understand something they hadn't before. This woman was not someone to be whispered about. She was someone who would be stood beside, no matter what storm came. Sunday morning came with a hush of golden light and birdsong soft over the rooftops of Hilford. The church bell rang twice before the doors opened. Eleanor hadn't planned to go. She still wore the plain brown dress, mended at the hem, her hair pinned back with care. But it was Lily who asked, "Will you come with us today?" Samuel didn't say a word, just reached for his coat and waited by the door. They walked as a family, not in hand, but in rhythm. When they stepped onto the chapel steps, heads turned. They were the same faces from the day Eleanor had arrived, standing in the same spots, mouths ready to whisper. But something had changed. Clara, the schoolteacher, stepped forward and offered Eleanor a place beside her on the pew. Reverend Hill nodded in her direction as he opened the service, eyes soft with something like apology. And after the sermon, old Mr. Jenkins, who once called her damaged goods, tipped his hat as she passed. "Brave thing you did for that child, ain't forgotten." A woman Eleanor barely knew leaned in and whispered, "You've made that man gentler. We all see it." The whispers weren't sharp anymore. They weren't shaped like knives. They were shaped like respect. When they walked through the town square later that afternoon, Samuel bought Lily a small sugar candy. She held it up to Eleanor before even unwrapping it. "For you, Mama." And no one corrected her. No one scoffed. Mrs. Langley, the mayor's wife, who had once called Elea, nor the mistake off the wagon, crossed the street and held out a bundle of fabric. "A few old dresses I can't fit anymore," she said, not quite meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Thought you might get better use from them." Eleanor paused, then accepted them with a nod. "Thank you." The woman blinked, taken aback by the grace in her voice. Samuel didn't say much that day, but he didn't have to. He walked beside Eleanor like he always had, slow, steady, certain. And now the town walked around them differently. She was no longer a question mark. It was late autumn when Samuel finally asked her to walk with him past the orchard. The apples had long since fallen, their scent soft in the wind, leaves crunching underfoot. Lily was at the schoolhouse for the afternoon, and the ranch was quiet. The kind of quiet that begged for unfinished words. They stopped by the edge of the small creek, where a single bench sat beneath the bare arms of an old oak. Samuel didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, staring out at the water. "I never thought I'd speak vows again," he said. "Never thought I'd need to." Eleanor turned toward him slowly. The breeze tugged at her shawl. "I've lost before," he continued, "and I made peace with silence, with routine, with days that didn't ask much of me." She waited. "But then you arrived. Not like a fire, not like thunder, just like a light coming on in a room I forgot existed." Eleanor's hands tightened over the edge of her shawl. "I know you didn't come here to be saved," he said, "and I never planned to fall in love again. But here we are." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in linen. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small, hand-carved wooden locket. "It's made from the oak that stands outside your room, the one by the window." He opened the locket. Inside was a drawing, a sketch of the house, the porch, and the faint outline of two figures sitting close with a child curled between them. "I can build you a better room," he said softly, "one with windows that catch the light in the morning, a garden just outside, a place you can call yours, not because I gave it, but because you chose to stay." Eleanor blinked, eyes filling. "I'm not asking you because I need a wife," he added. "I'm asking because when you speak, this house listens. When you move, it breathes. And when Lily calls you Mama, I can't think of a better truth." He held the locket out. "You can say no. Nothing between us changes." Eleanor didn't reach for the locket. She reached for his hand. "I never needed a perfect life," she whispered. "Just a place where I wasn't a burden. You've given me that." She took the locket and pressed it to her chest. "Yes," she said. And Samuel, who hadn't smiled in years, let something soft and full rise across his face. Not joy, but peace. The kind that stays. They were never the loudest love in town. No grand declarations, no diamond rings or white lace vows shouted under church bells. Just a man who had once forgotten how to speak his heart, and a woman who had learned to carry hers in silence. Eleanor did not become someone new. She became more of who she always was, just no longer alone in it. The child who once trembled now ran barefoot through the orchard, ribbon in her hair, laughter echoing between trees. And the man who once feared words now read stories aloud on the porch, his voice steady, hers beside him. The house changed too, not in shape, but in spirit. A second garden bloomed beside the kitchen window. The porch swing never stopped moving. And the new room, built with her favorite view, filled with the scent of drying herbs, stitched blankets, and quiet belonging. People still talked in Hilford, but the tone had changed. They spoke of Eleanor with respect. They nodded when she passed. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it by simply surviving with grace. And Samuel? He never had to speak much. His way of loving was, in the wood he carved, the tea he poured, the silence he filled without weight. In the end, this was never a story about romance alone. It was about something quieter, stronger. It was about dignity, rediscovered, not gifted. About shame, burned away by kindness. And how sometimes the deepest kind of love is simply this: two broken people choosing not to hide from each other anymore. Love restores dignity. Respect is beauty. And in the stillness of their porch, under the gold breath of dusk, the world finally understood what real love looked like.